I-V-M.
One of the themes we have been probing on Speakeasy with Dheeraj Sinha is that of change. How are today's direct-to-consumer brands different from the legacy brands? Are the principles of building these brands different from those of traditional brands? What do the brand managers of today need to do differently? We will be discussing a lot more about this in today's podcast. I spent a significant part of my working life cracking strategies for brands in different countries and cultures. I'm sure a lot of you will be working across markets and cultures at some point in time. But what does it take to understand a market that's different than yours? What lens do you need to apply in order to be successful? Yet another thread we are pursuing in our podcast is about how is the idea of leadership changing. What makes for a good leader today? Is it about being in control or giving away control? Is it about clarity of direction or finding one together with your team? And above all this, there's so much that we all have to do in our lives. And we always feel, where's the time? But we also come across people who have really aced the idea of time management. Look at Rishad Tobaccowala, who we spoke to in episode 7, and Vishal Gondal, who we had in episode 8. They're just able to do so much. Well, our guest today is similar. He runs a Fortune 100 company during the day and is an author by the night. He's already published more than 15 books. Welcome to Speakeasy with Dheeraj Sinha. And today I'm talking to Mainak Dhar. Mainak is the CEO India and South Asia at Kimberly-Clark and a best-selling author of over 20 fiction and non-fiction books. Mainak and I are going to talk about building brands in the new age, of course, changing principles of leadership, and most importantly, his secret to getting so much done. Mainak, welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Dheeraj. Thanks so much for having me over.
Yeah, great to have you. Looking forward to this conversation. Mainak, I want to start with your pedigree and having worked with the best brands, best companies in the world, right? So you've been with P&G, General Mills, now Kimberly-Clark, and there's also the other side of the world today where small startups, G2C companies are coming up every day, right? And there is a kind of a belief that the fundamentals of success or the principles of building these new age brands are dramatically different from how a Unilever or a P&G has typically built their brands. To give you a few instances, what's being talked about is that, for example, in a startup world, you build energy through multiple SKUs and you keep launching and you have say 100 SKUs running at one point in time, and you experiment and you do A/B testing and you're free to pull out because the cost of launching or putting things out there is not as high as a classical FMCG setup where you have to pull distribution and a launch process in a typical FMCG setup took about a couple of years to just get off and started. So there are changes, right? How do you, in your mind, right, navigate this new age? Is it so different? What are the things which are similar? And what is now called legacy companies should take away from this?
Sure, no, it's a really good question, Dheeraj. And I guess we started our careers roughly at the same time. And I think if you compare back to when we started our careers in the world of branding and marketing versus now, it's obvious that so many things have changed. And a lot of that's obviously been driven by technology and access to technology. The fact that we're sitting here having a chat over a video call would have been unthinkable 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's impacted how consumers interact with brands, how consumers shop, how they find information, indeed how manufacturers get to consumers. So it's undeniable that many things have changed. However, reflecting on it, I'd say the core qualities that make for a great brand builder probably have not changed all that much. Because if you think about it, even back then, who were the great brand builders? They were people who were insanely curious. They didn't just stop at the superficial aspects of how does the consumer buy my product, but they were really curious about what's going on in the consumer's life, what's impacting issues that are on their mind, how do they actually engage with issues not beyond just the category they're shopping. Um, and I think that curiosity, that open mindedness, that real desire and drive to find out more about what's happening on the consumer's life. And secondly, I'd say is mindset that embraces change, which doesn't
Yeah.
quickly, come up with one formula that this is the way brands are built. I think marketers who succeeded back then had that mindset, and marketers who are able to adapt to changes in business models, technology, are the ones who have that mindset. So I'll give you an example. I mean, you mentioned, big companies. The reality is there's no company out there which is homogeneous. I mean, I worked in
Yeah.
P&G for 18 years, and if you think of SK2, which long before people talk D2C and personalization, 15, 20 years ago, SK2 was doing that.
Yeah.
Consumers were buying it out of counters. There was one-on-one communication through CRM, and those were the key business drivers. And that was a radically different business model housed within, a so-called legacy company and an incredibly successful brand. And so when this is more than 10 years ago, I was the marketing director for ASEAN, and my portfolio included SK2, Olay Premium, Olay Base, hair care, all the way through to laundry sachets selling in rural Vietnam. And, that experience really drove home for me is the mindset, the way of thinking, the curiosity is what counts. Ultimately, even within a company, you'll find different business models, different consumers. So I think my biggest advice to people today would be, young marketers today would be, don't label yourself. Don't put, facile labels of this is new, this is old, this is different, this is better. Have that curiosity and open-mindedness, and really understand where the consumer is, where she is receptive, and be driven by that.
Yeah, no, fantastic. But I must underline, Manak, that the idea of curiosity and open-mindedness that you talk about, we need to talk a lot more about this, right? Because classically, we are looking for a formula. Or what's the formula which has worked for 2 decades, and can we apply that formula? And what I hear you say is that, I mean, that is not going to work for anybody. Doesn't matter where you are, and this need to reinvent constantly and the need to be curious is so important, right? And we need to underline that in a big way. Segueing into another similar construct, Mainak, right? I mean, technology, data, and AI, right? I mean, it's a new speak today. I mean, you see a lot of case studies being built in advertising where, in third sentence you will see, and we use AI and ML, right? It's become fashionable today. But at the same time, it's also at a real level powering a lot of the interventions that we are doing. You were talking about how, through augmented reality, some of the machines have been set up at Kimberly Clark and so on and so forth. How do you see this? How much of this do you think is a fad? How much of this do you think is real change? I mean, for example, yesterday I was talking to Rajesh Jejurikar, and he obviously is leading Mahindra, and we were discussing to what extent would, say, an auto buying experience change, right? And obviously the entire search has moved online, whether it's rural India or urban India, but people still want to see the car, people still want to feel the trim, and Rajesh pointed out very interestingly that, will you take the joy of negotiation away? Right? Would you standardize that, and would that be killing far too much in the process? So there are still questions of how much data and how much technology, and what really is the place for it. Where are you on this piece?
See, for me, Dheeraj, I'm a bit of an idealist or a purist on this, which is, let change be driven by what adds value to people, your consumers, your employees, your stakeholders. I think where we as leaders sometimes do a disservice is we insert our own biases into this, and we're all human and we all have our biases. And for me, I always say that, look, these are tools. These are not a fad. These are tools. And let's look at the broad mega trends going on around us. The broad mega trends going on around us are transparency. 20 years ago, in the corporate setup, the big people sat somewhere. Nowadays, everyone has the same share of voice. It's a few characters on Twitter. So the world has changed. It's much more democratized. It's much more transparent. Second is, I think, not just as consumers of categories, as people, we are all much more used to real-time information sharing, real-time decision making. And I think if I take those two broad trends away on how we as people are relating to information, expressing ourselves, how our consumers expect to be related to, I think where many of these tools really help is in allowing faster turnaround time on decision making, more real-time engagement. So if I think about when I began my career, the pinnacle of real-time research was, you run a print ad and you do day after recall. Nowadays,
Yes.
right? I mean, that was the pinnacle of it, right?
How many calls did you get?
Exactly. And nowadays, you put a campaign out there on e-commerce, you'll pretty much know within hours what the reaction is, what the click-through rate
Yeah.
is. So I think if the tools are being used to aid decision-making, to make better decisions for consumers, to drive transparency, I think they can be incredibly powerful. And I'll give you an example in my previous organization where we use the same principles of transparency and technology in something, completely, non-sexy, like wheat buying. So, at General Mills, obviously a large part of our procurement was on wheat. And a lot of the wheat procurement process was very old world. You'd have mandis, people coming, haggling, the usual concerns about, look, there are obviously going to be some rotten apples in the mix there. And we said, look, the world's moving towards transparency. All the people who are there are all buying stuff on Amazon or eBay. So we basically just moved to an e-auction system. It is complete transparency. You put your bids out there. You can see what you're bidding. You're seeing the minimum price. You're uploading your documents. That was a huge sea change for us. It was cost saving because you didn't have people traveling and handling. Does it take the joy out of the negotiation? Maybe, but then it also builds in a completely different level of transparency, makes it smoother, makes it completely open, and democratizes it. So for me, the thing that I love about technology is less the glitz and glamour and form factor. It's that for me, technology is probably one of the most fundamental tools that's truly democratizing society in terms of access to information, access to opportunities. And I think the more brands can take it in that spirit, which is we're moving away from a world 25 years ago where as the brand owner, I have the power. I am choosing which messages to give out to you. You are consuming it. I think nowadays we should just get rid of the word consumer. You're not a consumer. You're not a passive consumer. You're a part of that journey where you have an equal voice. You're giving feedback in real time. You're shaping how the brand can evolve.
Yeah. And you're not a manager anymore, right? You're not managing anything. I mean, it's a false sense of control that we're trying to have, right? I mean, you're at best navigating a narrative.
Absolutely.
Right. Manik, talk to me a bit about the brands at your end and how are you navigating the world of digital and e-commerce? Are you seeing a huge amount of shift to digital e-commerce? What is the future of personalization and data in that aspect?
I think in general, Dheeraj, and you've obviously lived through the thick of this, I think there's been a secular trend for quite some time on, consumers moving to digital, not just in terms of buying on e-commerce, but in terms of where they're engaging with content. And I think we have been seeing that trend for quite some time. E-commerce has been a trend. I think obviously over the last 18 months with COVID, with all the restrictions posed due to COVID, I think we've just seen an acceleration of that in a number of categories. And I think to some extent it will stick. To some extent, when markets open up again, you might get some normalization, but 18 months is a long time for habits to start sticking.
Yes.
So I think we're seeing a rapid acceleration of that. And for me, honestly, I don't think we should talk anymore about digital marketing and marketing because I think historically, many companies have thought of these as two different silos, that this is my digital marketing team and this is my brand marketing team. I think nowadays to be an effective marketer, digital is an important part of your playground. Now, depending on the category you're in, depending on the consumer you're targeting, that balance may shift. But even if you're working on a brand that's going into smaller towns in India with a mass appeal, guess what? All of them have phones. All of them are consuming data. And so you can't, I think that line has to blur now. And even as I think of between e-commerce and non-e-commerce, because I think one of the things which I feel many marketers should start realizing is e-commerce is not just a sales channel. A lot of people go there to actually check reviews and ratings and then decide what to buy. So, and I'll just give you a personal example as a consumer. I'm a book fanatic. I love reading. My whole family is mad about books. So, I mean, nowadays we unfortunately can't go to bookshops, but very often I'd be in a bookshop, in a Crossword or somewhere, and I'd find a book and I'd look up on Amazon and say, hey, what are people saying about it? So, that's just a personal example, but consumers are doing that in many categories. That e-commerce is no longer just a sales channel. It's almost a great brand building touch point. And that final end of the funnel sale may happen on e-commerce, may happen elsewhere. And I think the more marketers can think of it, not just as, oh, that's something for the e-commerce team to worry about, but really embrace it as This is now a critical brand building touch point. In the old days, we talk of third moment of truth, word of mouth. Now that's
Yeah.
all in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, and that's where advocacy has shifted, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where people are getting others' opinion and making choices based on that, even if they've not tested products. So they're feeling that if 100 other people are liking it, I'm okay to try this cream on my skin,
Absolutely.
right? And to your point on saying, digital and mainline. I mean, I have, for example, stuck my neck out that in a year or 2 years time there wouldn't be a digital agency and a mainline agency. there'll be
Absolutely.
there'll be one agency which will do full funnel. It's like back in the days when I started, certain agencies were supposed to do better print work and certain agencies were supposed to do better TV work. I mean, those artificial divides will not exist anymore, right? Finally you have to solve for the brand and solve for the funnel that the consumer is going through. I want to pick your mind, Manakon. You've worked in different markets. I mean, I, for example, for a decade did a Asia job and floated around in China and Vietnam and Indonesia and Singapore. Till finally I said, in Diwali, I want to be in India. And I chose a India job back. I want to pick your mind on what's your experience been in working across different markets and with different cultures, and what would be some of the pointers you can share with us? Because at a simplistic level, I know people say that, oh, you know what, Indonesia is a decade behind where India was, and so on and so forth. But I also realize that once you begin to open up a culture and a market, I mean, there's so many deep nuances that you have to really immerse yourself in. So tell us about how to navigate people, culture, different markets with your experience of having done this across.
Yeah, and Dheeraj, so I've had similar experiences to you. I spent 15 years of my career outside of India. I lived in Bangkok 5 years, 10 years in
Yeah.
Singapore doing regional jobs. I guess my big learnings out of that are, it might sound like a broken record because I said the same thing on brand building models, is the worst thing people can do is label and generalize.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you can do. I think the best thing you can do is actually get stuck in, and it goes back to the point on curiosity, which is really when you're managing a certain market or working with a new market or a new set of consumers, the best thing you can do is not superficially skim the surface and meet 5 consumers and say, I now know how they shop my category, but really understand what's happening in their lives, what's happening in the society, what's important to them. And that's where I think where you actually start forming connections and similarities and dissimilarities are honestly at a deeper level. It's values,
Yeah.
it's aspirations. And then those tend to reflect in differences in maybe how they shop different categories or why categories are developed in a certain way or not. So I'll give you an example of the Philippines. So I managed the Philippines market for a long time. I was managing hair care in a regional role. Philippines was a big part of our portfolio. So I used to travel there sometimes once a month, sometimes a couple of times a month. And when I started going to consumer homes, just sitting in their homes, in typical Philippines, the SECC house in a small slum, it's a small house. What always used to strike me is it's amazingly clean, even though it's small, and there's a big TV there in front of you. And one of the insights I got away is it was such a thing of pride for them that, look, we might have struggles, we might have issues, but is the importance of showing up under control. And that reflected in very high per capita spending, for example, on beauty care and hair care. And that actually was one of the insights we used in a campaign, in a brand which I worked with the team at Leo Burnett back then on Rejoice, which was this whole idea of it's your success is often reflected in how others look at you. And that came not from how do they buy shampoos, it was really a deep cultural insight.
Yes.
And if you think of it, that same insight in some way shows up in India as well. If I think of Thailand, where I spent a lot of time, my biggest learnings were not, sitting in a nice swanky air-conditioned room doing a focus group, but actually traveling to where consumers were, understanding, sitting in their homes, understanding where they live, how they're making choices about other parts of their life. So for me, my advice would be get stuck in. Don't be a tourist. Don't kind of go in armed with a bunch of research papers you've read. Actually live that culture, be part of it, spend time there, immerse yourself, and then pull out. And then chances are you'll probably find at a level of values, there are some clear similarities, there are differences as well, which then reflect into, how consumers might behave differently in different markets.
Yeah, I mean, relating back to my experience when I got into Malaysia, right? I mean, so wow, I mean, this is such a developed, shiny country,
Yeah.
right? With consuming all kinds of products, just a bit more organic than Singapore. And then I started doing work at a deeper cultural level and realized the fact that the mix of Malaysia is part Chinese, part Malay, and
Absolutely.
part Indian, right? Three communities kind of coexisting and living in harmony. A lot of the behaviors in Malaysia come from harmonizing, right? You're talking to youth there and they're saying, I really don't want to win at all cost. I mean, if my friend is winning with me, I'd like that. Now that is an emotion you wouldn't have found from an outside developed country frame. No, that's interesting. And you're saying, so basically you're saying get inside, be curious, and that as
Yeah.
a
And I
dominant
think the
frame.
important mindset shift for all young marketers, which I'd advise, is don't learn about, quote unquote consumers. I mean, I find it highly pretentious that, oh, these are consumers. It's like the
Yeah,
lab rats. Be
yeah,
curious about learning about people, build
yeah,
empathy, genuinely seek to understand people for who they are, not with a lens of, I want to sell you X and I'm going to look at you through a lens of, how do you think about my category? That actually, I think,
yeah.
is something which we probably don't teach at all in business school. And even as marketers, I think people underplay the importance of just empathy, curiosity, relating to people. I think if more marketers harness into that, some of these questions you're asking,
Yes.
I think, will be
Yes.
unlocked.
Yes. I think we chase, Manak, we chase objectivity far
That's true.
far too
That's
much,
true.
right? I mean, we feel that if we can abdicate our gut and our decision making to data, we are covered in some way. In fact, we are not. Uh, and I think that importance has to be brought. I wanted to discuss Manak with you and pick your minds on. I mean, I have this whole idea of what I call, brands need to be socio-capitalist, and especially in markets such as Asia, right, where we are not developed markets, right? I mean, and I was telling you that I was doing some work for Telenor brand in Bangladesh, and some of the research. People believed in the brand so much. It was such an omnipresent mega brand in that country. They expected the brand to build bridges to solve for infrastructure woes of the country, right? And I'm saying in a developed market where 2% of the population needs charity or needs lifting up. In markets, developing markets, bulk of the people who need lifting up. And I personally feel that it's difficult to leave that to public policy, and capitalism has some role to play in changing the plight of the masses, right? And therefore in that context, the idea of purpose, right? And interestingly, a lot of purpose work has swung between woke washing and being real, right? And some of it is inspired by our ambitions at Cannes, and some of it is actually real, embraced at a company level. So where are we? I mean, question number one is that, is purpose important? How deeply do we embrace it, right? Is it just good enough to have a statement around it, or does it need to get at the spine of the company in that sense, and does it need that serious real commitment? Where are you on this piece?
See, I guess, Dheeraj, for me, what's critical is authenticity. I think that's what's critical.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
what personally doesn't work for me is we have this amazing glowing purpose and vision statement and is there on a slide, and we do some stuff on the side to say tick the box. That's just hypocrisy. I think each brand, each company, every leader should be clear about why they do what they do. And I'm not even saying every company and every brand needs to go out there and contribute to
yeah,
upliftment. It's okay if you are all about, I want to get my profits from X to Y and get a certain valuation and have an IPO, just be bloody
sure,
clear about it
yeah,
and be unabashed about it, right? I'm not even judging if that's good or bad. I'm no one to judge anyone.
yeah,
But don't, tick the box and, selectively have a Twitter campaign in between because you feel like you need to be part of a conversation.
yeah,
If you ask my personal opinion, my purely personal opinion is I genuinely feel that we're all here to do something, and it must add up to something more than selling more of a certain product for a certain period of time. If that's the purpose of our life, it's bloody sad, yeah. And I think, right, it's a
yeah,
very depressing thought
yeah,
that we're going to spend so much of our time, energy, and passion, and all we'll have to show for it at the end of the day is, oh, I picked up a couple of
yeah,
awards and I sold some product.
yes,
And I think for me, those are important. Of course, we're all professionals, we're all working in corporates, we need to build our business. But for me, those are a means to an end. And what are those ends that make sense? First is, through that, are you genuinely trying to make some positive difference in your consumer's life? And it doesn't mean you're going to eradicate poverty, hunger, corruption, but approaching it with that mindset of I'm not just in it to sell a little bit more of something, but and that comes back to deeply understanding people, understanding where your brand can play a role, even if a small role, in resolving dilemmas, removing contradictions, making their life a little bit better than it was in
Yeah.
whatever category you're playing, but approaching it with that mindset. Second, I think becomes clearly the people you're working with. I mean, the best reason to grow a business is that you're helping your people grow.
Yeah.
They're learning new things, they're building their capability, they're growing. You know, as they say, charity begins at home, purpose begins at home. What
Yeah.
are you doing to help? And the final piece is through all of that, by creating an impact to consumers, by creating an impact to people, how do you ladder that up to getting more involved in the broader community? And for me, I would say I'm no one to preach to anyone on what's right or wrong, but what I aspire to, what I hold myself to is ideally, I would love to be a leader who leads organizations and works on brands which are truly embracing that in totality and saying, of course, we're going to build our business, we're going to grow our brands, but through that, make an outsized difference to our consumers, our colleagues, and the community. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I see as being important. And I'm no one to say if somebody says, look, it doesn't matter, we have a certain number, no problems, but just be unabashed about it. I think
Yeah.
what doesn't work for me is people ticking the box and saying we
Yeah.
need a purpose campaign. The core of authenticity is it's part of you, it's part of your DNA, it permeates how you run your business, how you interact with each other, the things you do. It can't just be a separate campaign which you run a few months of the year and say, I've done purpose. That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's not on the side, it's the core of what you
Exactly,
do.
exactly.
And it's also interesting, Mainak, is because I also feel it's a stirring of the pot that consumers have come to that level as well, where people are asking questions, where does this ingredient come from, right?
Exactly.
What's happening to people who are making these products? Our employees are interested in that as well. I mean, they're saying, is our sole purpose to sell these more soaps and more laundry, or are we going to do something bigger as well? So it's kind of a holy trinity of all of it coming together and pushing us in that direction.
Absolutely. No, in fact, one of the things which I find interesting is, a few years ago, people started talking about Gen Z, and one of the early stereotypes about Gen Z is they want instant gratification, they want to
Yeah.
move. All the research out there shows that they
Yes.
actually care the most about purpose.
About purpose.
And even in my
Yeah.
personal experience, whenever we've done stuff like, hey, we want volunteers, we're engaging in the community, a lot of your younger people are the ones who are really
Yes.
change agents, who get
Yeah.
the most enthused. So I think you're right. It's now something that's already around us in terms of what our consumers expect, what our employees expect. I think it's for us as leaders to really then set that tone and channelize that energy into making a bigger difference through our businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Manak, when I look at you, I see three different aspects of you, right? I see the business and the brand guy, Manak. I see the author, Manak, and I see the leader, Manak. So, I'll come back. We'll take a quick break and
Sure.
we'll come back and discuss the other two aspects and pick your brains on that. So, a quick break.
Perfect.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Manak, coming back from the break, it's a great conversation today morning. I wanted to shift gears a bit and get to the whole writing piece that fascinates me about you. Your latest book is called Brand New Start. It's about building personal brand. Why do you think it is so important for everyone to have a personal brand, and what are the principles to go about doing it?
Sure. So, Dheeraj, I guess the first question is it's not whether it's important or not for you to have a personal brand or whether you think you want to have a personal brand. The reality is you are already creating a personal brand because
Right.
your brand is the perceptions that are formed of you. So, I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest misconceptions which I try and target in this book in the beginning is many people say, I'm not interested in personal branding or it's not for me. Doesn't matter. Through
Yeah.
how you show up, through how you engage with people, people are forming perceptions of you. And a sum total of that perceptions is your personal brand. So I think it's important to be aware of that, to shape that, to make sure it fits with what you want out of your life so that you're building a more thoughtful and deliberate approach towards your personal branding. In terms of what's important, to be honest, not very dissimilar from some of the conversations we were having about brands, because one of the biggest things
Yeah.
I talk about is the importance of being purpose led. I mean, for a lot of people, they take personal branding to mean networking, being out there, schmoozing with people. Hey, it's ultimately about being purpose led on what are you trying to do, how for yourself, for others around you, how are you going to be of service to others. And that's one of the biggest things which I try and drive a mindset shift in. When many young people talk to me about personal branding, it's all about how do I succeed in my career, how do I get promoted. I say, look, the best purpose is how can I be of service to others.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
through that, of course, how do I succeed? And I think just articulating who are you serving, how can you best serve them given your strengths and passions is, I think, one part of it. The second part is authenticity. I think, again, in today's day and age, often you have people saying, I want to do X. And the question becomes, why do you want to do X? And very often it's somebody else did it, that's fashionable, that's high paying. And it's really drilling it down to what authentically works for you, what feeds your passion, what feeds your strengths, and being authentic about it. And the final part, which I talk about a bit, is just taking a leaf off the world of brand building, is just being more thoughtful about the key moments of truth and how you show up. So, if you take a clear example of a first moment of truth, which, in a personal branding context is when you come face to face with someone in a high stakes environment, an interview or a big presentation to the boss. A lot of our conditioning in our educational system is success is you are equipped with a barrage of answers and facts. Whereas quite often what people are looking for is mindset, curiosity,
Yes.
empathy. And
Yeah.
our business schools don't teach people about that. You're going into a meeting with the boss, you're mugging up all the numbers, but you're not spending time asking, what's on his or her mind? How can I best
Yeah.
help them succeed? Being authentic about things you don't know rather than feeling the pressure to have
Yes.
all the answers, instead asking the right questions. So it's really about, that's kind of the span in which I try and cover in the book. And, this book started in the early days of the lockdown last year. I put an open offer out on LinkedIn saying, look, if anybody needs help, let me know. I started hearing about people losing jobs, offers being rescinded.
Yeah.
So within a couple of weeks, I got more than 30 people writing in, especially young
Amazing.
people, people
Yeah.
fresh out of campus early in their careers who didn't have
Yeah.
mentors. So I started chatting with them, helping someone with their resume, helping someone prepare for an interview. And I started spotting a number of these common threads. And so I thought,
Yeah.
hey, it might be more useful to people if I could put all of this together in a book and get it out there.
Yeah, no, this is amazing, amazing. In fact, in one of my conversations, I was speaking to Richard Tobaccowala, and he's a prolific author, writer, commentator, and he has a similar model. He says, "What am I good at? Right? What do I have to offer? A, then how can I help people with that? B, and then C." He adds a third layer of saying, "In what formats can I be available then? So does it have to be a book? Does it have to be a newsletter? So on and so forth." So that's a very interesting framework, for people who want to create something of their own. I wanted to dig a little bit deep into your writing process,
Sure.
Rainak. I'm fascinated. I mean, as I see, you pretty much take out one book every year, which is
Yeah.
awesome, right? Because being able to run a company and write a book is awesome at level 1. At level 2, you don't write about what your day job is. You actually write fiction mostly. I mean, right? And so, how do the two worlds work? I mean, do they collide? Are you a different person in the day, different person at the night? Where does inspiration come from? I'm just personally very curious about
Yeah.
what goes on
Sure.
in your mind.
I'll tell you a bit about, we talked about purpose and motivation. I'll tell you a little
Yeah.
story about that, because I think people see the one book a year, they don't see why I do it.
Yes.
So, ever since I was a kid, I loved storytelling. I think I was a bit of a troublemaker. So in school, I had an imaginary friend who would sit next to me. In grade 7, I solved the next term's maths textbook and wrote poetry on the other side and sold that solution to my classmates for 25 cents a pop. At that time, we were living in Canada. So I was a bit of a troublemaker who loved making
Yeah.
stuff up. And over time, I think that just crystallized into a love of writing. So I wrote my first book when I was in DU, and that was an amazing experience to actually
Yeah,
write a book. I know
I've
you
read
did
that.
eco honors at DU, so
Yeah,
you would
I
have
did,
seen it.
and
Right?
your book Mainak Dhar and Samrat Singh, if I remember
Exactly.
correctly. Yes, yes.
And through that whole period, my mom was kind of this huge pillar of support. So here I was, a college kid who knew nothing about writing or publishing. She'd walk with me and go and meet publishers, and when We finally got it. But my dad didn't even know I was writing a book. And when it got published, we celebrated. And then, after I did my MBA and I started working, to be honest, I lost touch with writing. I just completely lost touch with it, got into the standard rat race of doing stuff. I lost my mom almost 20 years ago. So September 1, 2001. And one of the last conversations I had with her, she said, look, you're going to do amazing things in your career. I have no doubt you'll do well at whatever you do, but promise me you're going to do one thing. And I said, what? She said, promise me you're going to get back to writing again. Because she said, I want you to have the same joy you had when you were a boy making up stories. So I promised my mom I'd write one book a year at least till I died. That was my promise to her. And so she kind of got me reacquainted with who I really was. I mean, growing up, I was not this standard good boy. I was a troublemaker. I'd have this imaginary friend. So I'd write all the exams for my imaginary friend called Freddie as well. And I'd drive my teachers nuts. But and then somewhere along the way, we're all human, do your MBA, start working. I was not that happy because I had tried to become someone I wasn't. And my mom, I think the best gift she could give me was just get me back in touch with that, which is being successful at what you do does not have to come at the cost of not pursuing what you love. And that really got me back into writing. And so that's something, that's become a part of my life since then. In terms of, how I manage it, something I figured out over time. You mentioned all the roles I play. You missed the most important one, which is, for me, the most important thing I do is try and be a good husband and father. So, my priorities are really clear. It's family, then people at work who are counting on me, and then some time for my own fitness and writing. So what I do to fit it all in is just be disciplined and mindful. So I wake up really early, 5:30. I run for a couple of hours in the morning. When I'm writing a book, that's when I'm thinking about ideas. I'll typically write for half an hour. Then I go wake my son up for school. So before I'm engaging with family or work, I'm done. But then it's that discipline of writing every day, every single day. So one is the discipline. And the second thing I do is I declutter. So outside of this, I'm a really boring guy, Dheeraj. I don't drink, I don't party, I don't socialize, I don't network much. Every hour I get outside of work, I'm with family. And so I'm back to it's makes for a fairly boring life. But I figure, hey, we have limited time. Pick the few things that matter and be completely full on them. And so for me, the second part you asked, I actually don't think they're very separate. I'll tell you the biggest things that I have learned from one to the other. We talked a lot about understanding people, understanding motivations, empathy. Nothing builds empathy more than reading and writing. Because when you're writing, especially fiction, you're literally putting yourself in somebody's shoes. You're understanding characters, understanding their motivations. And I think that whole part of the writing journey really helps me at work, because ultimately, what is leading teams, right? In the kind of jobs we do, Dheeraj, we are not I actually think I'm the most useless guy here. I don't make anything. I don't sell anything. So my value...
It's about the teams. It's about our people.
It's about building teams, motivating people, inspiring people. And I think the whole skills of empathy, understanding people, storytelling to inspire are things which I take away from my night job, which helps me in my day job. I think the biggest thing my day job helps me with in my writing is the importance of discipline and execution. Because, a lot of young writers say, I'm writing, I don't have the time, I have writer's block. If you're working in a corporate like we do and you have a big initiative, you don't say, sorry, I have executive's block, I can't work on this today. It's the discipline of doing it every day. So when I'm working on a book, I have an Excel sheet where I'm tracking every day how many words I'm writing. It may sound really geeky, but I have an innovation calendar for the next 3 years where, quarter-wise, I have an idea of which book I'm going to work on. Not all of it may be worked on, but broad ideas. So I think that's those skills of translating vision to reality through planning and execution are things I take away a lot from my day job.
Interesting, very interesting. But tell me, this half an hour slot that you have in the morning, do you sometimes sit in front of the computer and say it's not flowing at all, or it typically always flows?
No, because what I'm doing, Dheeraj, and that's how I think I've gotten into the groove is when I'm running, I'm thinking of it. I have stuff kind of buzzing in my head. So when I'm writing, it's like, woof, It's all out
So
there.
you've queued it up.
Yeah,
all
so
of it.
when I'm writing,
Yeah.
it's like bang, in
Yeah.
half an hour, I might get
Yeah.
sometimes, 1,000 words out because it's all been in
Yeah.
mind. I've played around with stuff, I've visualized scenarios, or I've thought
Yeah.
through things I want to do. So that's where this kind of early morning ritual works really nicely for me.
That's very interesting. And I mean, have you thought about where this is headed? Would you, for example, think of doing this full time at some stage? Would there be a Mainak Dhar collective, for example? I know some of the authors now have, a team where the lead author creates structures and the team delivers the stories and so on and so forth.
No, yeah, I mean, for me, the joy is in the creative
Yeah.
process. Yeah, that's the joy.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, that would never work for me. And I'm a guy who's buzzed by doing many things. My wife
Yeah.
always says I'm highly distracted, which is probably true,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
I love doing so. I can't actually imagine saying, "Oh, someday will I only do one thing." For me, it's not
Yeah.
defining yourself by a
Yeah.
box. It's say do
Yeah.
all the stuff you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Figure out if you can manage it and deliver on all that's expected of you. Why not?
Yeah. No, I agree with that because even for me, right? I mean, I typically write about my day job. I write about branding, marketing, etc. But if you were to tell me that take 3 months off and go write a book, I wouldn't be able to do it. So all my writing happens when I'm really busy at the peak of my energy, at the peak of my activity, because that chaos funnels into my writing and the two have to interact. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do any of it.
Absolutely.
It kind of talks to each other. Yeah, I want to switch gears a bit, Malak, and talk a bit about leadership with you. And I know you've been putting out some content on LinkedIn, etc., which I've been following around what makes a leader, right? Your 100-word pieces on that. So in general, I mean, in fact, when pandemic started, I was terrified because, there was no playbook on how do you run this, right? We woke up one morning, none of us went to office that day. And I was like, 450 people in Leo Burnett, what would they be doing at this point in time? What would they be thinking? Right. And while I realized that, of course, life and all of that is important, I also figured that people need a purpose, right? You wake up in the morning, you got to do something. What's the purpose, right? And we did this platform of 50 people, right? And it's worked so beautifully. Now 18 months, every Tuesday at 10:30, 50 of us log into that and we have a conversation about what's happening with our organization, what the decision to make, and we democratized the whole process. It's worked beautifully, but some people have come to me and say, is this too democratic? Are your top leaders feeling left out, right? You have a platform where there's a 4-year-old giving an opinion, you have a platform where you have a president of one of your offices sitting. Are they feeling too much equalized? And then I wonder that, have I given away command too much? Right? I mean, because the whole theory on leadership is that you have to have command. You need to have all the answers, right? The leader cannot be seen vulnerable and flipping. And while I'm getting a lot of results from here, I often question whether what's really the real mix. And you also wrote about this, Manak, right? That it's not about aggression always, right? It's about going about doing your job with a purpose. So take us through some of your constructs around leadership that you've gained and where is this whole axiom headed?
So that's a really good question, Dheeraj. To be honest, I can't claim to have any answers. I think we're all figuring this out
Yes,
together.
yeah.
But a couple of thoughts on leadership, which I believe in, which we can chat about. To be honest, a lot of what I have seen as, what makes for successful leadership and doesn't, obviously, like all of us, we've learned from people we've worked with, bosses we've had. Actually, a big influence for me on what makes for great leaders was shaped by what I saw growing up with my father and my grandfather. So my father and my maternal grandfather were both police officers. My father served in the intelligence service for over 30 years. And so
my dad was in IB as well.
yeah, absolutely. So growing up, seeing them, the kind of work they did, what they used to talk about in terms of motivating people, what mattered, because then the stakes are much higher. Often people are
Yeah.
literally putting their lives on the line. It's
Yeah.
not as much as missing a month's target or not. And a lot of that, I think, has just shaped me into what my core beliefs are about leading people, which is number one, a leader's job is, of course, to give clarity of direction. You need to know where you're headed, and that needs to be clear. But how you get there, the best leaders are the leaders who co-opt people into helping find out the path. The leaders who pretend to have all the answers on how to get there and all the milestones along the way are probably kidding themselves, because you're probably more removed from ground reality. You're probably not as in touch with, to your point on, the junior most employee versus the president. A junior most employee might actually have more insights on how to
Yes.
execute against a strategy than a president. The second thing is truly caring about people. I think that matters a lot. And this is something I learned growing up, because, these were contexts where they used to operate in places where literally, my father took part in some operations in Punjab in the mid 80s. And the whole idea was, why would your people put themselves at risk if they don't see their leaders taking the same risks?
Absolutely.
So the whole idea of caring for your people, genuinely caring for them, not just superficially or a box in the org chart, but genuinely understanding who they are, what's going on in their lives, understanding how you can support them, demonstrating that you are working along with them rather than somebody who's giving a command and throwing them in at the deep end. And the third one, I think, is humility. Because I think the worst thing, a strong leader can also just be a tin pot dictator. Let's be honest. There's a very thin line. And the basic thing that makes people cross that line is hubris. When a leader starts believing, I know it all, I'm the senior person, I need to have all the answers, versus humility, which says, hey, I know where I want to go to. I'm going to get my team to help us find the answers together. Along the way, I'll be open-minded on when we need to pivot. Be open in accepting when we make mistakes. Own up to those mistakes rather than blaming your people for it or leaving them hanging out to dry. So those are just some of the values I believe in that I express in some of my posts. And I think part of the issue we have in the corporate world is, for a long time, we've created this stereotype of a strong leader needs to be this alpha individual who's hyper aggressive, who needs to have all the answers. Especially in the world we are living through today, none of us has all the answers. I think it's more about asking the right questions, taking help when you need it, getting your team along. I think those are probably the things that are really going to define truly strong leaders.
I connect with that so much, because my dad was in IB as well, and he would always be in the forefront to a degree of scare. And those were times that we didn't have, we don't only had a landline at home.
Absolutely.
And sometimes he would be gone, and for 3 days that phone wouldn't ring. And we wouldn't know he was probably doing an interrogation somewhere or running an operation. But to always put himself in the front. But a lot of this, Manak, for example, say in the startup world, right? I mean, the whole idea of hustle, the whole idea of one autocratic leader knows it all, is pushing, is also been eulogized fair bit, right? And it's almost made us believe that if you're a startup and you're hustling for, you're being the growth hacker. So to say, right? Then pushing through and being autocratic is the only narrative, perhaps.
No, I think hustling, moving with a strong bias for action, being agile are all good things, whether you're in a startup or in a large company. I think the difference is whether as a leader you feel like you're the one who has all the answers. And you're driving it, or you are humble enough to know that you have blind spots, and how do you get people to compliment you. And I think that for me makes the biggest difference between startups that scale and those that drop off after a while because they haven't built people around them, or they haven't complemented their own blind spots. And I think there's nothing wrong with many of the traits you talked about. I'd argue we could do with a bit more of that in larger companies. But I think whether, even if you're in a small startup, it comes with self-awareness, who can complement your strengths, how do you get ideas ground up rather than just telling people what to do. I think those are things that are going to help even a startup.
I think even in my business, right? I mean, for example, traditionally, the culture in the industry has been that you put your name on the piece that you've written. This script is so and so, or this idea is so and so. One of the things we did, Raj and I, at Leo Burnett, was we said that, the idea might start anywhere, but it takes 50 people to make it sexy, right? I mean, there's so many, it mutates to what it becomes finally, with clients, with several teams and so on and so forth. And therefore, it's the team that we always care for. I mean, for example, when we go on Cannes stage, there are 20 of us going on Cannes stage. It's not one person, because we really believe that it's the village that it takes to bring up the child. And that collective sense of ownership is what is required.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the last kind of a question, and you've kind of answered it in some way, Manak, but I mean, what would you advise today's generation, people who are listening to it? You're managing so much, right? I mean, family as a priority, writing, work. What are the 2 or 3 advice you would give people to say, how to focus and how to create what you're really wanting to create, especially in today's time when a lot of people, my own team are coming and asking, we're doing so much of work, when do we read? For example, right? And I say, you'll find time. If you really want it, you'll find time, right? But is there a slightly more structured answer
So,
to that?
Dheeraj, the honest answer is I don't like giving advice or gyan because, ultimately every one of us is different. Every one of us
Yeah.
kind of marches to our own drumbeat. What I can reflect on is what do I think works for me? And then, if your listeners can correlate that to their own experiences and see what works and what doesn't. I think one is just clarity on why you're doing what you're doing. I mean, what are you really passionate about? Where are you trying to add value? Who are the people you really want to serve? Just asking yourself that question. It's not that you need to have that conversation every day, but at least start by asking that question. Because often what happens is we go along on autopilot. We just get sucked up into doing stuff because others are doing it or we think it's expected of me, instead of really asking, hey, what's core to me? What's important to me? I think the second is, as a clear follow-up, is what are you choosing to declutter? I think it's always easy to say, I want to do X, I don't have time for it. The question is, look, what are things I'm doing today that I need not do or I could do different things with? So as an example, when we used to travel, now God knows when we'll travel again on business. When we used to travel, I used to get a lot of writing done on flights, in airport lounges. So I was probably a very boring travel companion, but I just said, hey, this is otherwise dead time. And let me use this for something I'm passionate about. So I think there's always time. The question is to be thoughtful about where do I want to focus and what do I want to declutter, and then just being thoughtful and deliberate about it. And I think that's the most important thing. I think that was an unlock for me, which is just reflecting on, there are times when I'm just passively sitting there and watching a movie, for example. Nothing wrong with watching a movie, but hey, if I really want to write, rather than saying I don't have time, maybe use some of that time for writing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is declutter, right? I'm saying focus on what you because the same is 100 that you have. I mean, where do you...
And I think also, if you are true to yourself and you're authentic, then be unapologetic about it. So, I'm a reasonably asocial person. I wouldn't say antisocial. I have some really close friends who I hang out with and have deep connections with. But I'm not one of those guys who will land up for every single reunion and every single party. And it's not that I don't like hanging out with people. It's that I don't like superficial relationships. For me, if I have deep friendships, I'll be full on and stay connected. So I don't show up for most of those. And it's a choice. And I'm just unapologetic about it. That, hey, this is ideally how I want to relate to people, a deep one-on-one relationships. And so I will make a conscious choice not to go to certain places and use that time either to be with family or catch up on my passions.
Yeah, and you don't carry a guilt on your
And you don't carry a guilt,
as
long as you're authentic about it, right? And so you don't feel compelled to do stuff because others are doing it. You don't feel guilty about it. And you take the time to explain the why to people who matter as well, right? I think that's also important. It's like we talked about a brand purpose. It's you just being transparent. Hey, this is who I am. This is what makes me tick. And then you're just being really transparent with people around you. And so they understand who you are and why you do the things you do.
That's amazing. It's been a great conversation, Mainak, right? We end my set of questions here. We take a quick break and come back where you get the chance to grill me back.
That'll be fun.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. We have a new collaboration with Hunts Magazine, and there's a show called Hunts Vani that's come out from that. Treat yourself to Sarita Panti's beautiful ghazal, Dar Raha Hai Muskurane Se Koi, voiced by Jashne Kalam artist Shashwata Sharma. On Postcards from Nowhere, discover how two different systems on writing were developed, one in Kashmir and one in Kerala. Kunal and Shivani Rajput talk about fitness, entrepreneurship, sibling rivalry, and share their Raksha Bandhan plans on Agla Station Adulthood. Dr. Rajiv and Manik Deshmukh share the love story behind their 52-year-old marriage on Marathi Kid Ki Tun. Chuck tells us about 5 lessons he's learned on The Habit Coach with Ashton. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Ciet, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
So my chance to put you on the spot, Dheeraj. I feel really powerful. I can ask you anything and you have no idea of what I'm going to ask you. So let me start with some easy ones. Big company or startup? Which kind of client do you like working with more and why?
more startups of late because we get to create from ground up, and we've had a lot of joy, Manak, in past few years building brands such as say Spotify, PhonePe, etc. I mean, they're not really startup well funded startups, but the whole idea of creating something from ground up has been a huge learning.
Excellent. So a brand you've never worked on but would love to.
Apple.
Apple, yeah. No, I'm a huge Apple fan. But why for you? I'm a huge Apple fan as a consumer, but for you, what about it as a brand?
Because I feel that Apple is a brand which has not been created by marketing. It's a brand which has been created by product. I mean, it strangely features in most marketing presentations. But I think marketing and advertising takes undue credit for having built this brand. The brand has been built by product and design. And one of my recent theories is that marketing is embedded in product. So if I had a shot, I'd like to have that shot of saying, how can I influence all the way back to the core?
Excellent. Now I'm going to make you pick favorites. Favorite brand you've worked on and why? And don't give me a cop out on they've all been great, and don't give me 3 brands. You have to pick one at the risk of ticking off some of your clients.
Oh my God, favorite brand I've worked on. My current love is Spotify.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you enjoy about working on it? Yeah.
See, because we're learning every day. I mean, here's this one cool brand, right? European brand which has come to India. How do you keep it cool still in India, right? I mean, 10 million counts for nothing. How do you get to 100 million, still keep it cool? So I'm learning and relearning and experimenting a lot of theories on how do you expand a market? How do you do education for a brand? Still, you keep the desirability on. So lots of relearning there. In fact, being pushed to the corner on that.
Nice. Now, see, like me, you were at DU Eco Honors.
Yeah.
And then you obviously built a long career in advertising. Anything you learned in those 3 years at DU that you feel you still use in your career all these years later?
So I spent, in fact, I was at SRCC, I was in the hostel, Manak. I spent very little time in the classes actually. So I spent in those days in DU, right? I was a debater, and every time you won a debate, you won about 2,000 rupees as prize money, and that used to become my pocket money, which we used to blow with our friends and so on. And so my dominant memory of DU is going to various colleges, winning those debates and enjoying that fun. I mean, organizing crossroads. So I think I learned a lot outside the classroom. I read a bit of Jean Derez and so on and so forth in economics, but I learned a lot outside. So organizing. I was president of 3 societies: English Literary Society, Debating Society, organizing crossroads, even managing goons. Right, because I had a strange event called Mr. Miss Crossroads. I don't know why that was part of English Literary Society, but I could never fathom that. But it was, right, because maybe we had to ask 20 intelligent questions. Maybe somebody said, okay, put it in ELS. And just before the event, I had some 10 people saying that I won't let you make this happen, and how we manage that situation. So a lot of situation management, organization, even culture development. I think some of the building blocks happened there, Manak.
No, I completely resonate here. I was at Hindu, and a lot of my time went into quizzing, and I was writing. But I think what I really value about the DU days, even more than the MBA days, is that whole space to be yourself, do a bunch of stuff, learn from a variety of different experiences. So last question. When's the next book coming? It's been a while. What are you working on? Are you working on something? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I am working on something, right? In fact, but just that, honestly, my last 18 months have been so tough, right? And we've been so focused on just getting the agency and the system through this, right? I've been writing on and off. But honestly, I miss the travel time, which you spoke about, right? I used to get a lot of my writing in the travel time. And now that's gone. So I need to find a slot. But there is some concept being developed, hopefully in a year's time.
Nice, excellent. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's all I had, Dheeraj. It's been amazing chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Manak, for doing this. Lovely conversation. And thank you for making time for this.
Thanks.
One of my greatest learnings from today's conversation is that there is no single way of building a brand or a company. The only thing that separates a good marketer from a poor one is the ability to be curious. While today we talk a lot about D2C brands, Manak reminds us that almost 2 decades ago, SK2 from P&G was doing exactly the same things as selling directly to the consumer and so on. So it's really about being curious, and then everything else falls in its place. The other aspect which stood out for me was that far too often we block things in silos. For instance, our treatment of e-commerce as a mere distribution channel. Mainak makes an interesting point there when he tells us that Amazon is perhaps where the new age brands are indeed getting built. It's the reviews and the customer comments on Amazon which constitute word of mouth today and go a long way in building your brand. So e-commerce isn't a new channel for distribution alone, it's a new channel for brand building. Something that Mainak said really hit home with me, that we are all here to do something greater. The purpose of life can't just be to sell more products. We all need to figure out what we have that we can give. And it doesn't really have to be something very lofty like solving for poverty. But what can we do to make something better? I thought that really made the idea of purpose clear and actionable. Leaders put themselves out there and lead from the front. They genuinely care for their people and are interested in them. They have a clarity of direction, but they co-opt everyone in finding the path. I think that so precisely captures what leadership today has to stand for. And finally, I loved Mainak's idea about declutter. Time is always there, he says. The question is, where are we spending it? He provokes us to decide what is really important for us and spend our time doing exactly that and nothing else. Outside of all this, I live a very boring life, he says. Well, those were my learnings from today's conversation. What were yours? Do tag me on my Twitter handle Dheeraj_Sinha or leave your comments at speakeasywithdheerajsinha.com. If you like this podcast, you can explore other amazing podcasts on the IVM Podcast app and website. You can follow them on social media at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.
Season 3 of Echoes of India, your favorite history podcast, is back on the IVM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Anirudh Kanasetti. Join me on a journey through the wonders of early India as we explore the centuries between Buddha and Ashoka with critical research, empathy, and great storytelling. Along the way, you'll hear from all the vibrant peoples who shaped our world, from monks and farmers to warriors and emperors. New episodes are out every Monday.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa Vaisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.